Okay, wicked. So this is going to be a really quick fire video today. Firstly, I'm going to teach you about all of the slicing and warping methods that I know, and then I'm going to show you a really cool break layering technique at the end of it. Okay, so what I have here to start with is just an Amen break at its original speed, as it would be if you just recorded it from the record. So when you have a break like this and you want to bring it into your project to work at, say, 170 BPM, which is quite a typical drum and bass speed, like a faster project than the actual break was recorded at, you have a few options about how to warp this break to your project tempo. Now, the first way, which is kind of quite an old school method, is to actually pitch the breaks up. And back in the day, they would actually do this just by ear, by just tuning a break up a certain amount of semitones and fine tuning it to get it to work at the speed of their project. Nowadays, we have all these really nice algorithms, and in Logic, this speed algorithm, all you got to do is take the original break and then just warp it to fit within the actual bars. So I know this is a 4-bar break, and so this is now going to fit perfectly the 4 bars in my tempo of 170 BPM. The next very viable option is to actually use time stretching, and there are lots of time stretching algorithms now, but you want to use one that's actually going to be generally made for percussive stuff or for drum parts. And in Logic, this is called slicing, flex slicing. And this is really good because it preserves transient detail better than some of the other time stretching algorithms will. But the difference between the flex slicing and the pitching is that the flex slicing is not actually going to tune up or pitch up the break to warp it to your tempo. So we have these two really great methods in Logic, but what about Renoise? Well, in Renoise, we also have a percussive time stretching, but it does a lot of transient smearing and it's not nearly as effective as Logic's one. If I just show you now. It's got loads of artifacts and sounds pretty crazy. So I generally just try and stay away from using this percussive stretching in Renoise, but the repitch is going to give you a very similar result to using the speed algorithm in Logic. So as well as these two Beatsync options in Renoise, there's actually a little bit more of a rogue third option, and that is the old school Akai way of stretching a sample. And what we're really doing here is re-triggering the sample over and over again and then moving it along this ruler here. You can send SSX commands in Renoise and it's going to move the kind of play position to re-trigger the slice at different points along this ruler. So that's actually warped it to my tempo. You see, that one's got more artifacts in it, but sometimes that's actually come out pretty good and clean and it's not sounding too terrible. So I do think this time stretch effects is definitely another viable way of stretching your samples in Renoise. But the whole point of me actually making this tutorial is to show you another very effective and possibly more creative way that not many people know about of stretching and warping your samples to your song BPM. Now, in the past, I've called this gate to tempo. I don't really have a name for this technique specifically, so I'm just going to call it that for now. And what it basically involves is if I take a fresh sample here and I'm just going to slice it at all of the hits, so all of the transients, including all the shuffles, everything like that. So now I've got all these slice markers in, the next thing for me to do is actually go right click, slices, and render slices to phrase. And what this is essentially going to do is create like a groove template with all the right offset values to make this loop perfectly. But interestingly, my BPM is set at 170, and if I show you the original sample, that's at the slow original speed of the Amen. But if I play this in my playback now, it's actually playing at the perfect BPM of my project. So if I sped this up to like 250, it's gone a little bit crazy there, maybe 190. It's looping round perfectly. And one thing is you've got to have a perfect kind of 2-bar loop in this section to make this whole thing work. 1 bar, 2 bar, 4 bar, it just has to be a perfect loop. And interestingly, what's actually happening here is that it's triggering the notes at the same time as that groove template, but it will just chop off the ends to make it fit in the faster tempos. And I can actually show you this. So if I just go and actually render this to a selection, and then I make this big again, and if we can compare the two, you see this hit here is the same as this hit. But what's happened is it's just cut the rest of the tail of this sample. It's cut all of this stuff away to make it fit with the tempo, but the actual hit, the groove, is staying the same. Now, what's so cool about this is, firstly, I can change my BPM to whatever I want, really. And if I take it really slow, what's going to happen is it's still going to maintain that groove. But now, if we go and look at the sample, it's actually added silence at the end of the hits because it's not long enough each hit to kind of fill the space. It's added silence to maintain that groove. Okay, so why is this so useful, and what's the point in going through all of this effort to warp your break to speed? Well, the first thing is that it's actually not going to affect the transient of the hits at all. Because it's just cutting the ends of the samples off, you're completely preserving the original transient detail. And also there's some really cool things we can do. So if I come into the modulations tab, I can go and set up just some macros here. So I'm going to assign tuning or pitch to a macro. And then I'm also going to come to the volume, and I'm going to put an ADSR on the volume. And then what I want to do is have 0 attack and no sustain, a really, really low release time. And then I'm going to map decay now to a macro, and then I'm going to go from maybe about 30 milliseconds to 2 seconds. That's what I usually do here. Okay, cool. So now I have this instrument. So what's really cool about this is I can play with decay and pitch, and it's going to maintain the groove, but I can manipulate these two things independently. So I can control that decay, and I can make things really snappy, and I can actually automate this on and off if I want to. So I could say have this full decay, and then here I could bring the decay really snappy and then make it go full again. So you can see you can have instant crazy fun with that kind of stuff. And what's also interesting is all the same stuff is applying. So if I want to change my BPM to something like 150, all this stuff is still working, so it's really good for just like getting stuff in any project, and it's going to work great. So the other thing, if I go back to 170, is that you can change the pitch as well. So I can try and match the pitch to what... So this is how it actually, the Beatsync algorithm in Renoise is pitching it up, but I can kind of do this just manually. But I have all this control now per hit, and it's a really clean and precise way of doing it, and really creative because you can mess with both these parameters now. So what I really love to do with this technique is actually to use it to layer two breaks together. And what I have here is this flow break, which is more of like a kick snare style break. And then I have this other break, which is a more like a shuffly break. And so this is the flow one. I think this one is from Ecstatic Goldmine. Anyway, what I've done here is I've done that trick where I rendered this one out to a phrase. So I'm just triggering it here to make it work perfectly with the BPM. And then for this flow break, I'm actually just triggering the notes just to line up the kicks and snares with this other break. So I've got everything rolling around really nicely there. And what I've actually done then is come into each of these breaks, and I've created these kind of selection of effects here where I've got pitch, decay, volume, low pass filter with some sample rate reduction, high pass reverb and compression. And what I've then gone and done is actually mapped to my MIDI controller here. Break one, I've matched like pitch to here, decay here, volume and low pass. And then on break two, I've done the same and mapped decay there and volume there. So I basically have the most essential controls where I can start to match these breaks just by ear with my MIDI controller, and it's really fun, this technique. So what I've done, the good thing about having this volume control is you can whip the volume down and sort of tune one break and then start to bring the other break in. So I think that's quite a cool result there. And the amazing thing about Renoise is to bounce all this stuff down, I can just click in this. See, I've created a group here, and if I click in the effects track of the group, you can just go right click, render to sample, but I've mapped that now to my numpad. I think it's number 4 on my numpad actually. So number 4 on my numpad, and then I have this. So I only need this first little start of it. So let's get rid of this. And it's just a really fun way of creating lots of custom breaks and variations of breaks to use in your projects. So have fun with this one, and yeah, I'll catch you very soon back on my channel. Peace.